Chapter 1. Carrie had often dreamed about coming back. In her dreams she was 12 years old again, short, scratched legs, in red socks and scuffed brown sandals, walking along the narrow dirt path at the side of the railway line to where it plunged down off the high ridge through the Druids' Grove. The yew trees in the grove were dark green and so old that they had grown twisted and lumpy like arthritic fingers. And in Carrie's dream, the fingers were reaching out for her, plucking at her hair and her skirt as she ran. She was always running by the end of the dream, running away from the house, uphill towards the railway line. But when she did come back, with her own children, the railway line had been closed. The sleepers had been taken up, and the flat, stony top of the ridge was so overgrown with blackberries and wild rose and hazel bushes that it was like pushing through a forgotten forest in a fairy tale. The tangled wood around Sleeping Beauty's castle. Pulling off the sticky brambles that clung to their jeans, Carrie's children said, "No one's been here for hundreds of years." Not hundreds, thousands. 100,000 years, 1,000,000, billion, trillion. Only about 30, Carrie said. She spoke as if this were no time at all. I was here with Uncle Nick 30 years ago, during the war, when England was at war with Germany. The government sent children out of the city so they shouldn't be bombed. We weren't told where we were going, just told to turn up at our schools with a packed lunch and a change of clothes. Then we went to the station with our teachers. There was a whole train loads of children sent away like that. Without their mummies, the little one said. Without their dads. Oh, quite alone, said Carrie. I was 11 when we first came here, and Uncle Nick was just going on 10. Uncle Nick was old. He'd been old for years, and had grown so fat in the stomach that he puffed when he stooped. The thought of him being 10 made the children want to giggle, but they bit back their giggles. Their mother was looking so strange, eyes half closed and dreaming. They looked at her pale, dreaming face and said nothing. Carrie said, Nick and I used to walk from the town along the side of the railway. It was quite safe, not like the electrified line. There weren't many trains anyways. Only, 2 or 3 a day. And they came dead slow around the bend in case there were sheep on the track. When there were, the engine driver would stop the train, get out of his cab and shoo them off. And sometimes he'd wait so that everyone could get down from their carriages and stretch their legs and pick blackberries before they set off again. Nick and I never saw that, but people said it often happened. There were especially good blackberries here, easy to reach and not dusty, like the side of the road. When they were ripe, Nick and I used to pick some to eat on the way. Not many. We were always in too much of a hurry to see Johnny go to bed in Hepzibah Green. Go to bed? Yes, just like that, Carrie said. Go to bed. She smiled, a half-remembering smile, half happy, half sad. Waiting for her to go on, the children looked at each other. Carrie was good at stories, but sometimes she stopped in the middle and had to be prompted. People don't have names like that, the oldest boy said, encouraging her. Not real-life ordinary people. Oh, Johnny Go to Bed and Hepzibah were real all right, Carrie said, but they weren't ordinary, any more than Albert was. Albert Sandwich, our friend who lived with them. Lived where? There were no houses in sight. The wooded mountain rose on one side of an old railway track and fell steeply away on the other. No sound of people either, no cars, no aeroplanes, not even a tractor. Only a pigeon or two in the trees and the sheep barring below in the valley. Druid's Bottom, Carrie said. She looked slyly at the children and laughed when they laughed. It really was called the house in the valley, where the yew trees grow. That's a bit of a mouthful, even in Welsh. So everyone called it Druid's Bottom because it's at the bottom of the grove. No one knows about Druids really, the eldest boy said importantly. All that mistletoe and human sacrifice stuff, that's just legend. There's always a reason for legends, Carrie said. It was certainly a sacred grove of some sort, some old religion, bad or good, I don't know. But it had a queer feeling. You'll see for yourself when we get there. There's a spring that was supposed to have healing powers, and the remains of what might have been an Iron Age temple. Or at least Albert said so. The eldest boy made a wild, gagging sound, as if a fishbone had caught in his throat. Then he turned bright red and mumbled, "How much farther?" What he had nearly said was, Dad would have been interested in this temple. His father had been an archaeologist, and he was dead. He had died in the spring. It was August now, and the first time they had gone on holiday without him. They had been driving through Wales to the sea, and Carrie had turned off the main road into a narrow valley and said this was where she and Uncle Nick had lived for a while in the war, and would they like to stop the night and see it? They hadn't wanted to very much. The little mining town was so desolate and ugly, and the only hotel smelled of stale beer and greasy chips. But Carrie had looked so different suddenly, so happy and ironed out and eager, that none of them had said so. Now, watching her, the eldest boy wished he had. Her smooth, happy look was gone, and she was screwing up her eyes and her mouth so that her whole face seemed crumpled, like an old handkerchief, he thought. Perhaps it was only the hot climb that had tired her, but it seemed more than that, as if she were, all at once, uncertain about something. Her voice was quite steady, though. She said, "Not much farther, I don't think. Of course, it looks a bit different. Places often do when you come back to them, but I think I remember." Soon as she turned the bend and saw the tunnel, yes, there it is, the first yew. Between them and the black tunnel mouth was a cleft in the mountain, a deep gully dropping away from the ridge. No more ash and hazelnut trees with the sunlight dancing and dappling between them, only old, gnarled yews growing thickly together. A dark, green, silent place where no birds were singing. They stood on the ridge, looking down. The littlest ones pressed close to Carrie. She glanced at their faces and said lightly, "A bit scary?" "Nothing to be scared of. Just a few old trees, though Uncle Nick used to be scared sometimes on the way down. Oh, he was such a baby. He was even scared of the skull when Hetzibah showed it to him, and there was nothing to be scared of in that. Shall I tell you about it? It was the skull of an African servant who had been brought back to England in the time of the slave trade, and it was supposed to scream if it was taken out of the house." The oldest boy resented her tone, which was that of a grown-up amusing the children. He said, "I know that sort of story, screaming skulls and all that. All rubbish, really." Carrie looked at him. Albert Sandwich said it was rubbish. He said the skull probably came from an Iron Age settlement. He said the British Museum would know. He wanted to take it and ask them when the war was over. He was interested in that sort of thing. She paused. Dad would have been interested too, wouldn't he? Albert and Dad were very much alike in some ways. Although she was smiling, there was something tight in her voice, as if she were holding her breath. Perhaps she was. She seemed to let it out in a long, gusty sigh and walked away from the children, down the track to a place where a flat rock jutted out the side of the bank. She stepped onto it, and a little breeze caught her hair and lifted it behind her. She called out, "There's the house. Come and see." They followed her and looked to where she pointed, through a gap in the yews. Druid's Bottom was a long way below them, a doll's house with tall chimneys tucked in the fold of the valley as if it were in the crook of an elbow. There's a path, Carrie's daughter said. A bit slippy and slimy, but we could go down if you like. Carrie shook her head. There's no point. No one lives there. No one could live there now. They looked again. It's a ruin, the eldest boy said. Yes, Carrie said. She sounded flat and dull, as if she had known this all along, but had hoped something different. We could go down all the same, though it'd be a long way back up. Lazy fat, lazy tyke. Fat and lazy yourself with brass knobs on. Come on, let's go down then. It's not far. No, Carrie snapped. Her own sharpness seemed to surprise her. Hand flying to her mouth, she gave a queer, trembly laugh and looked at her children. They stared back and saw the colour had come and go in her face. She took a pair of dark glasses out of her pocket and put them on. Eyes safely hidden, she said, I'm sorry, I can't. I really can't. Really. That odd laugh again. Almost like crying. Oh, I'm so sorry. Dragging you all this way in the heat. So silly, really. But I wanted to show you and to see for myself just once more. We were so happy here, Nick and I. I hoped. That was all I'd remember. The children were silent. They didn't know what she was talking about, but they could feel that she was frightened. Their mother was frightened, and it frightened them. She saw it. She drew a deep breath and smiled at them shakily. I'm so sorry, darlings. It's all right. I'm all right now. Far from all right, the oldest boy thought. He took her hand and said, Let's go back now. Let's go back and have tea. He drove the others on ahead with a look. Following them, Carrie stumbled, as if the blind behind her glasses, but he held her hand tightly. It felt so cold to his fingers. He said, Won't take us long to get back. Quicker going downhill, and a nice cup of tea will make you feel better. I suppose they will give us tea in that pub. Though it's not much of a place, is it? Neither the pub nor the town. Derelict, he had thought when they drove through the main street. All those boarded up shops, only old people about, dreaming on doorsteps or creeping along in the sun, like a place that was waiting to die. Pit's closed, said Carrie. They opened it up during the war, but the seams were too deep, not economical. I suppose once we didn't need coal so badly, they closed the mine down, and then the railway. I should have known, really. She spoke as if she should have known more about more than the dying town. She sighed, and he felt her hand shiver. She says, Places change more than people, perhaps. You don't change, growing older. I thought I had changed, that I'd feel differently now. After all, what happened wasn't my fault. Couldn't have been. It just didn't make any sense. That's what I've been telling myself all these years, but sense doesn't come into it. Can't change how you feel. I did a dreadful thing. The worst thing of my life when I was 12 and a half years old. Or I feel that I did. And nothing can change it. Couldn't change what? He longed to know what she meant. What dreadful thing had she done? It sounded more interesting to his mind than druids or screaming skulls, but didn't dare ask her. She had been speaking, it seemed, more to herself than to him. She might feel he shouldn't have listened. She would tell him in her own time, or she wouldn't. She was looking too tired to talk anyway, tired to death and so white. He thought, I wish Dad was here. And then, as if he could walk with his eyes shut all the way back to town, it might magic him back. Crazy, of course. If he had caught any of the others doing such a crazy thing, he would have laughed himself sick. But they were a long way ahead now, and his mother would never guess what he was up to. She might not think she had changed, but she was too old for that. He would walk on, holding her hand and letting her lead him, turning his head a bit so she wouldn't see his eyes closed, and keeping the sun on the left of his cheek as an additional guide. The tricky part would come when they had to leave the straight track and turn down through a gate and a field. But magic never worked if the thing you had to do was too easy. And if he had managed to do it without her noticing, when they got back to the pub, his father would be waiting there, waiting for them and smiling. "What on earth are you doing? Grinning like an ape with your eyes shut?" He opened them and saw his mother's face smiling down, and felt his ears burn. "I was just playing a game." "At your age, you ought to be over the edge in a minute." She was teasing him, as if he were one of the little ones, but he didn't mind, because she was looking happy again. When she took off her glasses, the sun caught her eyes and made them flash like green torches. She said, "Look now. You can see the whole of the town from here."